We have responsibility, Terry. We did not have any accountability for what was going on there, and we should have. Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
They thought that they had sufficient
No,
resources.
that is not a question of how they had been. They don't know. They clearly didn't know, and I take responsibility for not having them just prepare for more.
Now, if you were watching the events of January 6th like I was, and you saw the Capitol breached by that crowd on one side of the Capitol pushing past pretty feeble police barriers set up by the Capitol Police, and the Capitol police officers were vastly outnumbered there. And then there was some damage done to windows and doors, and cops being pushed through the back of the door as the crowd rushed in on one side of the Capitol. Now, on the other side of the Capitol, you saw Grandma and Grandpa walk through a door that was literally held open by a Capitol police officer. By the way, those people are charged with crimes too. I will literally never understand that. When you're at the Capitol and a police officer opens the door for you and you walk through it, you're guilty of a crime. No one can ever explain that to me. But if you were watching that day, I'm sure, like me, you were wondering, where the hell is the security? We've known for over a week that there was going to be this big rally on January 6th at the Ellipse. We knew that everyone was going to go to the Capitol. Basic crowd control protocols would have put security in place. And why isn't the National Guard there? You probably asked that question. And if you watched the January 6th hearings, the Select Committee on January 6th to get to the bottom and reveal the truth to the American people about everything that happened on January 6th and why it happened, you'd be left scratching your head, because nowhere ever in any of those hearings did you hear anything about the National Guard or the lack of adequate police and law enforcement at the Capitol. And by the way, anytime anybody talked about the National Guard, they threw out this fake red herring that Donald Trump should have called in the National Guard, or even worse, that Donald Trump prevented the National Guard from coming in. Both of those things are false. The president can't call in the National Guard for domestic purposes. That's constitutionally untenable. It's got to be a local governor who calls in the state National Guard. And in the case of the District of Columbia, which is not a state, thank God, it's a combination of the mayor of D.C. and the Speaker of the House if it pertains to security and law enforcement or crowd control needs at the Capitol. That would be Nancy Pelosi. And of course, Donald Trump didn't block the National Guard. In fact, he preemptively authorized the National Guard if, in fact, the request was made. So what in hell happened? Right? You're left scratching your head because the January 6th committee, the Select Committee, they never addressed this issue. And when you know that the Speaker of the House is Democrat Nancy Pelosi, you start to smell a rat. Oh, she's the one who should have called in the National Guard and never did. Where the hell is Nancy Pelosi? And up until late yesterday afternoon, we've never had an adequate answer to that question, but now we do. This video would be a smoking gun. This is Nancy Pelosi being hurried out of the Capitol in her limousine Suburban, and the film is being documented, ironically, by her own daughter, who had a deal with HBO to make a documentary about this transition of power. It's almost like they knew something was going to happen, isn't it? Why else would her daughter, the documentarian, be there documenting everything? Well, watch Nancy Pelosi. Listen to Nancy Pelosi.
We have responsibility, Terry. We did not have any accountability for what was going on there, and we should have. This is ridiculous. You're going to ask me in the middle of the thing when they've already breached the inaugural stuff that should we call the Capitol Police? I mean, the National Guard? Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
They thought that they had sufficient
No,
resources.
that is not a question of how they had been. They don't know. They clearly didn't know, and I take responsibility for not having them just prepare for more.
Wow, this is enlightening on several levels, and we're going to break this down piece by piece, and then we're going to show you some other things that have been said about that day and show how this actually coincides with a lot of things that we crazy far right-wing conspiracy theorists, J6 deniers have been saying since day one. Let's watch this again together, shall we?
We have responsibility, Terry.
Talking about Terry McAuliffe. No, not the former governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe, the chief of staff of Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House.
We did not have any accountability for what was going on there, and we should have. This is ridiculous. You're going to ask me in the middle of the thing when they've already breached the inaugural stuff?
She means the scaffolds that were set up to accommodate the cameras and the crowds and everything that is been set up for the inaugural that was to take place 2 weeks later. You've seen the videos of people climbing up on all the scaffolds and throwing things.
Should we call the Capitol Police? I mean, the National Guard?
Yeah, should we call the Capitol Police is an odd thing, and she corrects herself and says National Guard. This is something that's never been mentioned here. You know, the Capitol Police is not a very large police force. In Washington, D.C., there are many, many, many law enforcement agencies that all have kind of overlapping jurisdictions, but also they have jurisdictions that sort of butt heads with each other. Now, on a day like this on Capitol Hill, with so much going on, you had, and I'm just going to give you the brief overview of law enforcement. You've got Capitol Police, probably the smallest police force of all of the entities there. Their job is to facilitate security at the Capitol, shockingly. Usually that involves, basic ingress and egress of the building, checking through, metal detectors and x-ray machines, checking for appropriate credentials and identifications and things like that. But it's not to handle a mob. It's not even to handle a big demonstration or protest, which happens a lot. When there's a protest in numbers, they always call in reinforcements. Now, you got Capitol Police that really just handle the building and the personal security of the members of Congress. So Capitol Police was never designed to handle a big crowd. You've also got the D.C. Metro Police. They were there in a certain level of presence, but not at the level they should have been. Certainly, again, that's Mayor Bowser's decision and the chief of police. You have the Park Police. Now, the Park Police is in charge of the National Mall, the monuments, the various areas that are national parks, which are right there. You've also got Secret Service. They're a law enforcement agency as well. And they were there because Kamala Harris, who is now in line for the presidency at that time, or was under Secret Service protection, she was there, as was Vice President Mike Pence. And even Nancy Pelosi has a certain level of Secret Service detail because she is in the line of succession for the White House, which is a chilling thought. You've also got the FBI law enforcement agencies, and they're in Washington, D.C. quite a bit, and they have a certain function as well. And, well, I think we've learned now after the fact that there was a big FBI presence there that day, but I guess we're still not supposed to talk about that, are we? They were sort of keeping that on the down low. That's just a handful of the law enforcement agencies there. But here's the important thing. When it comes to voluminous, large, giant numbers, like for an inauguration or for the March for Life or for any other kind of big demonstration that happens on the mall, National Guard. National Guard, that's what they do. National Guard gets called in to supplement in just sheer raw numbers all of those other law enforcement agencies that I just detailed. And here's Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, who is the person who would have been responsible for calling in the National Guard, asking, I guess rhetorically, should we call in the National Guard?
Should we call the Capitol Police? I mean, the National Guard? Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
She's the one who would have the answer to that question. She's the one who's supposed to call them in advance. Now, we'll get to why she didn't and why she didn't know about this in just a moment, because we have testimony from the police chief, the Capitol Police chief, who was in charge that day. And we'll show you his testimony coming up in a moment. You didn't see it during the J6 hearings. You only saw it after the fact when Republicans had the majority in the House. And we'll show you what he had to say about the National Guard. But Nancy finishes here.
They thought that they had sufficient
There
resources.
was not a question of how they had been. They don't know.
Who's they? Are they talking about the Capitol Police? Because the Capitol Police never said that they had sufficient personnel. In fact, Capitol Police specifically asked for the National Guard. That's Chief Sund. We'll show you his testimony in a moment. So who exactly do they mean? They thought they had sufficient numbers. Do they mean Park Police? Do they mean DC Metro Police? Who's they? I'm literally asking that question because I don't know, even though we had a select committee on January 6th, headed up by Liz Cheney, to get to the truth and reveal all of these facts to us, the American people, about what happened on the darkest day of our democracy, the darkest day, even including Pearl Harbor and September 11th. This is the worst day in our history. And yet, I have no idea what they're talking about when they say they thought they had sufficient people. Who's they?
They clearly didn't know, and I take responsibility for not having them just prepare for more.
I take responsibility. That's a fascinating thing that you never heard again from Nancy Pelosi. In fact, you heard quite the opposite. She deflected responsibility to everyone involved, mostly to Donald Trump and, well, to you, if you voted for or supported Donald Trump, because you're all MAGA fascists who want to shred our Constitution. I take full responsibility. She never accepted responsibility. She deflected it the entire time. In fact, I will argue that the entire January 6th Select Committee was designed to cover this up, to hide the truth, to hide the facts about the most seminal, important aspect of the events of January 6th, and that is the lack of security, the lack of coordination, the seemingly inappropriate level of protection for Congress that day. The January 6th committee never having uncovered or even asked the question about appropriate law enforcement and appropriate security on the day of January 6th, the fact that they never delved into that or asked any of those questions tells me that that committee was designed on purpose to ignore that issue. And who put together that committee? That woman right there, Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi, who claims she's taking responsibility, that she has accountability on this. And then she put together the January 6th Select Committee. And when Kevin McCarthy said, okay, well, as is tradition, the minority is allowed to appoint their members to the committee. Here's Congressman Jim Jordan and I believe Andy Biggs of Arizona. And Nancy Pelosi said, nope, they can't be on the committee. Unprecedented. First time in American history that the Speaker of the House denied the minority leader representation on a committee. Nancy Pelosi hand-selected the members of the minority party to be on that committee. Why would she not want Jim Jordan on that committee? Maybe because Jim Jordan would ask about this. So instead it was Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, neither of whom are in Congress anymore because their voters rejected them. Their job was not to get to the truth. Their job was to cover this up and then to spin a new narrative, a narrative that was going to finish Trump forever. Oh, after this committee, no one will ever support Donald Trump, except the American people are smarter than that. And we smelled it for what it was. Now, this video hit yesterday. Yesterday afternoon is when this video hit. And over on MSNBC, Nicole Wallace had the get of a lifetime. This is the hottest story in America. We've got this smoking gun video of Nancy Pelosi. And so Nicole Wallace gets Nancy Pelosi, and now she can ask her about this. I'm going to pause this immediately after you see the first question she asks. Then you'll see the answer. But we got to analyze the question first.
Why do you think this is stirred up and a brouhaha on the right and in some corners of the media today?
Wow, that is, I gotta say, I am rarely actually surprised at how low Nicole Wallace and MSNBC can go in their lying, agenda-driven propaganda. But that was the first question. Why do you think the right even cares about it? Why do you think this has become an issue? Really, Nicole, you don't see it? You're not sure why? This is insane that's the question that's asked. This is a great opportunity to say, Why didn't you call in the National Guard? Because the chief of police of the Capitol Police said that they asked for the National Guard, and your security chief denied them that. Why didn't you know about requests for the National Guard? Because you seem to not even know if the National Guard was requested, or because you were asking where the National Guard was, or whether you should call in the National Guard. By the way, spoiler alert, National Guard didn't actually get mobilized until 5 p.m. that day. 5 p.m. Hours after that video that you just saw. There are so many questions that could have been asked. When you say you take full accountability, why haven't you actually taken responsibility? Because you've been pointing the finger at everybody. And why didn't we learn about any of this in the January 6th committee? I would have asked Nancy Pelosi a lot of questions other than, gee, why do you think conservatives and those idiots on the right are making a big deal out of this? Nicole Wallace, by the way, should be known, is a Republican. She's the one who was in charge of Sarah Palin's candidacy when she was running as vice president with John McCain. It was her idea to have Sarah Palin have a sit down with Katie Couric. That's who Nicole Wallace is. Let's watch Nancy Pelosi's answer. It's really, really educational.
Well, because of the fact is that the president of the United States, the former president, and his toadies do not want to face the facts. They're trying to do revisionist history on January 6th. But
I'm sorry. Revisionist history? No, there's nothing to revise. Those were your words. That was you on the video saying the things that you said. No one's revising history. We're actually revealing history. This is like how Libs of TikTok gets in trouble, because all she does is take the videos of these maniacs on TikTok and then puts it on Twitter for everybody to see. And then the maniacs on the left say, how dare you show us who we are, saying what we say out of our own mouths? What do you mean revisionist history? All right, I'm sorry, Nancy, please. I didn't mean to interrupt. That was rude.
we cannot let us be dragged into their, again, false impression of what happened that day. They know what happened that day. They know how serious it is and was and continues to have an impact on our country. And yet they want to call the people who were in there hostages. Last night I received the Lincoln Award. I was so proud of receiving that. And I said in my remarks, Lincoln built the dome on the Capitol. He insisted that it be built during the Civil War so that it could show the resilience of America. And to see these people coming through the Capitol with their foul deeds and foul actions, waving Confederate flags and Nazi flags under Lincoln's dome was so shameful.
Gee, Nancy Pelosi, what's this whole, you not knowing about the National Guard and getting overwhelmed because there wasn't enough police and saying that you take responsibility for it? What was that all about? Well, let me tell you a story about Abraham Lincoln. But I don't remember anybody waving a Nazi flag, by the way. I don't think I remember seeing a Confederate flag. I know they had that hateful appeal to heaven flag. That's triggering. But this entire answer, and it goes on for another minute, is it even worth showing the last minute of this, Kevin McMahon? We can't.
So. I think we should.
Should we? All right. But this entire thing is really a non-answer. She's not actually responding to the news of the day in this video of her and what she said and what was going on at that moment. It's just another opportunity for her to dredge up the narrative that she created through her own toadies on the January 6th Select Committee to basically tell a narrative that is contrary to this little glimpse of fact that we've now had revealed to us. That she took responsibility, that she didn't know anything about security, that she didn't know anything about the National Guard, that she was clueless at a time when she was actually supposed to be the one providing security for herself and the members of Congress on that important day on January 6th. And she, through her staff, actually denied National Guard presence that day. We'll get to that in a moment with Chief Sund, but sure, let's finish up Nancy Pelosi's diversion here.
And yet this former president who incited this insurrection would not send the National Guard for hours. People were harmed, people were killed, but died one way or another. And what did he do but try to deny that any of it happened?
Hold on. I'm sorry. I don't mean to keep interrupting, But she just said that Trump didn't send the National Guard. I just want to be clear again, constitutionally, legally, the president of the United States can't send the National Guard, number one. Number two, on that video, Nancy Pelosi is not saying, should we get Trump to send the National Guard? Why doesn't Trump send the National Guard? No, that's not what she says. Let's go to the video.
Should we call the Capitol Police? I mean, the National Guard? Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
She says, should we call the National Guard? Why weren't they there to begin with? She's not saying Trump should call. Quick, get Trump on the phone and get the National Guard here. No, this is the news story that they have. This is the fake story they have. This is the cover story that they have. This is the lie that they have.
This is a terrible thing, but let us not take away the attention of what we need to do to go forward. We have to unify our country. We have to bring people together in a way that honors the vision of our founders, the sacrifice of our men and women in uniform, as well as the aspirations of our children. I just came back from D-Day in Normandy to see our veterans there it was the 80th anniversary of it. Some of the youngest of them were 97, some over 100. They fought for our freedom, and yet you see how it is being denigrated by the former president and his Republican toadies.
She literally just said, we have to come together and unite over the D-Day veterans, the people who have fought for freedom and fought to protect our nation and our ideals, and then in the same breath calls Trump and people who support Trump toadies. Let's unite, except for those toadies who we hate. Those MAGA fascist extremists who basically were the same people that our D-Day veterans were killing in Europe and liberating people from. The height of deceit and despicable behavior from this woman, it can't be matched, and it continues. By the way, who else knew about what was going on that day? Donald Trump interview with Kristen Welker, Meet the Press, just a few months ago. And watch how Kristen Welker is really engaged in this issue.
By the way,
on that day,
Nancy Pelosi, I don't have, why would I tell you that? Listen, Nancy Pelosi was in charge of security. She turned down 10,000 soldiers. If she didn't turn down the soldiers, you wouldn't have had January 6th.
Did you call military or law enforcement?
So here's Donald Trump saying Nancy Pelosi was in charge of security on Capitol Hill. Nancy Pelosi turned down 10,000 troops. If she had those 10,000 troops, this never would have happened. And the only question Kristen Welker gets from that, boy, talk about the curiosity of a journalist. The only question she's got is, did you call law enforcement or the military? Which again, if you know what you're talking about, you know that the president can't do that. All right, as promised, here he is. He's a good man. He's a noble man. He is the chief of police for the Capitol Police Department. He was the chief of police on January 6th. Here he was in 2023. This is September, I believe, in 2023, when he was called by the Republican majority to tell his story. Liz Cheney never wanted to hear his story. Nancy Pelosi never wanted to hear it. You would think that you would have the chief of police from January 6th there to explain what happened. But it wasn't until Republicans were in charge that we got his testimony on camera.
When the police department becomes overwhelmed and we dial 911 because we need assistance, that goes to the National Guard. Yeah. It sure as hell would have been great to know that they put out this memo restricting the National Guard from assisting my men and women in advance of January 6th, knowing now that they were so damn concerned about the violence that they were expecting to come on January 6th, and no one ever told me about it.
Yeah, that's terrible. I mean,
the National Guard, who's only 2 miles from our headquarters, sat and waited for the evening crew to come in. While the Pentagon was still sending resources to protect generals' homes, they sent me nobody to help my men and women.
Okay, and I only have 30 seconds left. When were you finally given the green light to bring the National Guard to the Capitol?
At 2:08 p.m. At 2:08 p.m.
So that was over an hour after you originally asked.
That is correct. I'm sorry, 2:09 p.m. 2:09 p.m. Irving finally gave me approval, because I still remember where I was sitting, because I screamed to the watch commander, mark the time, because I finally got approval to bring the National.
All right. That memo that he was talking about at the beginning was a letter that Mayor Bowser was part and parcel to, where they specifically said, let's not bring in the National Guard because we're worried about the optics involved after months before the Black Lives Matters protest that ended up with, arson in front of the White House, that, there was a overwhelming use of force in their minds with the Black Lives Matters protesters, and they wanted to avoid the optics of the Capitol looking militarized. So that's why they didn't want to bring in the National Guard. And, well, they certainly got a different kind of optics that day, didn't they? That's Nancy Pelosi. And that's a smoking gun video. And that's just part of the truth about January 6th that still needs to be revealed. But it's kind of hard to look at that and not reach the conclusion that Nancy Pelosi is guilty. Nancy Pelosi is guilty of negligence and of dereliction of duty. And, it appears, of a pretty major cover-up.